Thank you for joining us. I'm Kateryna Schray with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Anara Tabyshelieva, and our program producer, Professor Larry Schray. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war in Ukraine, and today we're welcoming back some of our previous guests and looking back on our year-long efforts to inform people about the tragic events unfolding in Ukraine. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. A quick greeting to our viewers in Ukraine. Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякуємо вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі. Our program began as an urgent panel on Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022, 6 days after Russian forces invaded Ukraine. At that time, our purpose was to educate the Marshall University community and our general area about Russia's attack on Ukraine. We had no idea that we were starting a weekly program or where that program would go, but each week since that program, we are able to recruit and host experts from many different fields to keep the public informed of the tragic events happening in Ukraine. We've had 55 programs so far. Today is our 56th. Our guests have included 32 academics or expert analysts, 22 eyewitness accounts, 5 frontline volunteers, 14 poets, writers, literary translators, 7 cultural commentators, 1 artist, 2 musicians, 1 military expert, 11 people or groups from the United States who are helping Ukraine or Ukrainian refugees. And these groups include a medical doctor, a dentist, the St. Sophia Religious Association of Ukrainian Catholics, Razom, Help Ukraine, and most recently, Sunflower Seeds here in Huntington, West Virginia. Our program has hosted speakers from 6 countries other than Ukraine or the United States. If you add up the total views from all of our programs on YouTube, they total to 12,192. The average is 222 views per program. Our highest is actually a session with Dr. Alexander Motil on May 12th, 2022, which hit over 1,000 views. Our second highest is our initial program that aired on March 2nd, and that was 924 views. And then our third highest is again with Dr. Alexander Motil on September 30th, 2022 with 817 views. We're very grateful for your continued attention. One of the worst things that can happen is for the rest of the world to forget about the suffering happening in Ukraine, to give in to that compassion fatigue and information fatigue. So we're very grateful for your continued support of our program. We have a great series of reflections today from our previous guests, Yuri Marusik, Marina Lvovskaya, and Dr. Bob McCollister. But before that, I am so pleased to interview our main speaker today, Dr. Anara Tabyshelieva. Our regular viewers will recognize her from her weekly opening of our MUkraine program. Indeed, she is one of the main reasons our program has aired now for over a year. Dr. Tabyshelieva earned her PhD at Kyrgyz National University in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, the oldest university in that republic. She is an associate professor of Asian history here at Marshall University. She teaches courses in modern and pre-modern history of Asia, Eurasia, and Russia. She is a highly respected and well-recognized scholar, and her projects have been supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, UNESCO, the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Woodrow Wilson Center, and the United Nations. She was a scholar in residence at the United Nations University in Tokyo and at the Center for the Study of Islam and Muslim-Christian Relations, and also at the University of Birmingham in the UK. A prolific scholar, Dr. Tabyshelieva has authored several books and chapters and reports on history, international relations, social development, and gender issues. She has served as co-editor of UNESCO volume History of Civilizations of Central Asia towards the contemporary period from the mid-19th to the end of the 20th century, and participated in UNESCO Hirayama Silk Road Program and Silk Road Expedition. She's the author of many other works, including Defying Victimhood, Women and Post-Conflict Peace Building, and Escaping Victimhood, Children, Youth, and Post-Conflict Peace Building. She is currently on sabbatical, working in the Library of Congress on her current book, and we are so lucky that she is using her talents at Marshall University, and I am so pleased to welcome her to today's program. Welcome, Anara.
Thank you, Kateryna. And what I would like to talk today about recent events, and again, it just was some introductory notes. Let me share my PowerPoint here. I would appreciate if you intervene and ask any questions. Now we are thinking about Russia's war against Ukraine and its implication for Eurasia. This month was particular for us. If you look at what happened, we can see three important visits in Ukraine, Russia, and Central Asia. Xi Jinping visited Moscow, and then we can see Anton Blinken visited Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and India. And also the third one is the event that Moldova, a small, a tiny nation sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania, uh, challenged Russia. They approved law on national language, and now instead of Moldovan language, it will be Romanian language. And of course, we know that Russia supported pro-Russian forces in Moldova. It was an easy decision, and what is many analysts say that in the future, Russia may invade Moldova like it did with Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Crimea. So that we can see immediate threat for Moldova now. And the other possible sport that concerns many, this is the border, and this is Kazakhstan. And I will explain why. So let's just briefly consider these three important visits. So we can see the changes in Eurasian geopolitical architecture. Kishida was the last of the G7 leaders who visited Ukraine, and he invited Zelensky to Japan. So that again, Transnistria, Moldova challenged Russia, openly challenged Russia. And then we can see the next is Antony Blinken tried to unite Central Asian countries, and I will actually explain later in another slide, slide about this. I just would like you to see this picture that shows architecture or in Eurasia that the vulnerable spots we can see besides Ukraine, in Moldova, Kazakhstan, and of course the Baltic states. And I just wanted to emphasize there was a very important visit of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He confirmed commitment of the U.S. And this commitment includes encouragement Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan to resist Russia's ambitions, because we can see that gradually these countries are involved in this war. So that was a very timely and important visit to reinforce U.S. commitments to their sovereignty and territorial integrity. And also there, Blinken mentioned about partnership on solution to shared global challenges. What we imply under global challenges, Russia and China. This region is sandwiched between two superpowers, and that we can see how the possible conflicts may emerge there. So if we see that this is old picture, this is a cartoon dated to 2013. There was a old competition between Russia and China over Central Asia, and initially China played very modest role. Situation has changed since Russia-Ukrainian war. Now Xi Jinping actually indicated this unequal situation, and China clearly demonstrated interest in mineral resources, territories, and arms in Russia. In general, most analysts believe that their visit was a failure, and it did not resolve. Beijing was disappointed, and of course, Putin also was disappointed. And what we can see that they had very modest result. They wanted to, both Beijing and Moscow wanted to continue their old project power. It's a new project, Power of Siberia 2 gas that will transit through Mongolia to China. And of course, for us, it's very interesting to know position of China. And we know that China, like Turkey and India, they favor a quick end of war, regardless Ukraine's contested lands. And what we can see also that now situation shifted in Central Asia, and we can see that China can control this territory more openly. And their last step was that Beijing invited leaders of these four states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, to the first China Central Asia summit. So we can see that one of the winner of this war is China. So if we look at Central Asia, we can see how Central Asia, Central Asian countries are involved into this war. First of all, look at the long border between Russia and Kazakhstan. This is the world's second longest land border after border between Canada and the US. So 12 Russian provinces border Kazakhstan. So that it means that Russia and Kazakhstan both could not control this border. And it means that also migrants are coming in large scale to Kazakhstan. And also we can see the traders, business people see profits from Western sanctions. They sell consumer goods, they sell high-tech products, and they use also Central Asian states and states in the South Caucasus to evade sanctions on Russia. So that's very clear that the sanctions are failing because they underestimated the connections between Central Asia, the South Caucasus, and Russia. And in second moment that we should also consider that Kremlin relies on the loyal support from Central Asians. There are two bases in Central Asia, what is in Kant, near Bishkek, near capital Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and the second in Tajikistan, the largest Russian base in former Soviet republics. And if you look at this base in Kyrgyzstan, we actually see that there are some troops brought from Siberia, trained in this air base and sent directly to Ukraine. So you can see that, and government of Kyrgyzstan even did not know about this. So it tells how Central Asian countries are used in this war. Besides, there are many migrants who are moving to Russia, and they are recruited to rebuild conquered territory in Ukraine, and they are used as their actually workers for their even on front line. So if we go back to the so-called new great game between Russia and China, we can see that Kazakhstan is extremely important. It's oil-rich country, and that's contested territory between Russia and China. And we can see that China's grand strategy to expand its sphere of influence is successful. And after visit of Xi Jinping, we can see clearly that Russia is turning into a raw material, a colony or appendage of China, and clearly seen as a junior partner. There was a tremendous humiliation for Putin. So, and if we look at Putin's doctrine, what they expect, what Putin and his allies expect, we can see that from the beginning they wanted to restore first Soviet Union, restore Russia's grandeur, and they promote a so-called Russian world that it's very unpopular in post-Soviet republics. And the next, on the next level, they wanted to reestablish pre-1917 Russian Empire that includes Poland, Finland, and other territories. And I would say that Putin's doctrine is relatively popular in Russia, and that from the beginning he said many times that he denies real statehood in Ukraine, Moldova, that Ukraine belongs to Russia. And here is a quote from his original publication. I said that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole. These words were not driven by some short-term consideration and prompted by the current political context. It is what I have said on numerous occasions and what I firmly believe. So that you can see that was said in summer 2021. There was a preparation for the war, but people believe that it's just a not serious comment. The next level, of course, is Central Asia. And he believed, or Putin said numerous times, that Kazakhs never had their statehood. His friend Dmitry Medvedev resumed that these statements, and he presented Kazakhstan as an artificial state that includes Russian land. So that was a direct threat to Kazakhstan. And for us, it's very important to know that Putin is not alone. And what we can see in the most important institution behind all these recent changes is FSB Fifth Service. The Fifth Service is a previous KGB Fifth Service, and that controls situation and manages situation in post-Soviet republics. And they employ different tools, and they operate openly in Moldova, Central Asian states. They clearly destabilize situation when Moscow is not happy with these countries. And they actively and visibly support pro-Russian groups, politicians, journalists. So that's a very powerful institution now. And for instance, recent documents released that the FSB had a 10-year strategy to include Moldova, to begin some to encourage some border conflicts in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And the FSB is doing everything to prevent, and Russia, the Kremlin, I would say, prevent regional cooperation between post-Soviet republics. And of course, another move, we can see that FSB strengthens cooperation with security forces in all post-Soviet republics. So that at the same time, as a decision maker, as a most powerful institution, the Fifth Service quite often miscalculate. And one is an example of this miscalculation that Ukrainians will accept Russians, they will welcome them, and that would be an easy victory. So if you look at the Putin's inner circle, for us, it's very important to know what might be next year or even this year. We can see from the beginning for a long time and it is a Soviet tradition that Siloviki, the so-called Siloviki, we can other people call them people of force or securocrats. They control the situation in country for a long time, from the beginning of the Soviet Union existence, and that they will probably dominate in the future. And possible successors of Putin is the following. Nikolai Patrushev, you can see him here, the head of Security Council of Russia, and his son, Dmitry Patrushev, who is possible younger successor. Then Mikhail Mishustin, Prime Minister, Sergei Sobyanin, Moscow mayor. But we think that in the future it's probably might be Troika, a union of Patrushev, Bortnikov, or Shoigu, or another person. So Putin has very limited number of advisors or people around him. That's mostly Patrushev and Bortnikov, and it just tells us how Russia might be, how Kremlin's decision might be unpredictable in the future. So I just would like to stop here, and I welcome any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anara. That's very helpful. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Questions or comments, please? Panel or guests? We will move to next guest, but we have a couple of minutes for questions. Of course, questions can be asked later on.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, good.
Anyone? If we have no questions at this moment, I would give microphone to our guest from DC, Washington, DC, Marina Lvovska. Marina is a chemistry professional who we met here at Marshall University, West Virginia many years ago, but she was twice on our program, and she's very active in Ukrainian community in DC. She volunteered to talk for a few minutes today on some immediate topics of interest. Please, Marina.
Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. I do not have my slides today as usual. I would like to speak about different things that are going on in Ukrainian community in Washington, D.C., and also about Russian-speaking community. Forget me if I will jump from topic to a topic, but I will not take too much time today. So first thing I would like to say about what is going on in Ukrainian community. A lot of people have arrived during this past year because of obviously because of the war. They came by Uniting for Ukraine program. Before this program was established, people were coming through the border on temporary protective statuses. So the community have definitely grown, I would say 2 or 3 times than what it was initially before the full-scale invasion. Before full-scale invasion, Ukrainian population was also big, but as you can imagine, Ukrainian community was not as united because the language differences, there were language differences in Ukrainian people and Ukrainian populations. Part of Ukrainian people were speaking Russian and part were speaking Ukrainian. So now, since the full-scale invasion started, more and more people realize that their language that they want to teach kids is not Russian and they want to teach Ukrainian. And because of that reason, a lot of people started to unite not only because of that reason, but it's one of the driving forces. People have started uniting into Ukrainian community, into Ukrainian Facebook groups. This is our usual regular way of communicating and spreading the information in community by Facebook groups and other social media. And also, I would like to point out that before the full-scale invasion, there was no such unification of Ukrainian people, and now we can see that more and more Ukrainian events are going on in area. Most of them are fundraisers. Some of them are just regular cultural events. We had recently on the event performed by Ukrainian poet Sergei Zhadan. It was very exciting event, and there were some musical concerts. And when we see that there are advertisement about Ukrainian concert in United States, we like some of the Ukrainian representative from Washington D.C. We always look where they are coming. Are they coming to New York, Philadelphia, Chicago? If there is no Washington D.C., we always try to make sure we say our word, say raise our voice to invite this performer or the poet or musical band to Washington D.C. We feel that it's very important to unite people, Ukrainian people around the Ukrainian culture. As for the other things in community, me as an administrator of Facebook group, Ukrainian Facebook group, I see a lot of events and I see a lot of process in the community. Recently, one lady, she posted that she found occasionally, she wasn't looking for it, she found that Montgomery College, this is a local community college, is offering a course about Ukrainian identity. It's a non-credit course, but it's already have been offered to students. We got all excited about it because this is where we feel this is our cultural front should be started from. We feel we as Ukrainian community feels the need to re-educate and advocate for Ukraine on a basic people-to-people level. And when we saw that Ukrainian identity course is offered is in a simply community college, that was a great sign. I'm not a participant of the other universities, but I've seen several lectures and several videos from different universities in the area, Georgetown University and American University. I've seen it from the videos. I haven't been present over there personally, but I've seen that there are a lot of movement going on, some lectures, some discussions about Ukrainian identity and the way Ukrainians see their history. We feel that it is very important to remind people around us, to re-educate them and to show our perspective on the history, because I found my personal experience that I had a conversation with American husband of my Russian friend, that he was trying to prove me that Ukraine and Russia was always together because they were brotherly nations. And this communication, this conversation have started from his phrase, Marina, why you always angry and hateful? I said, why do you think so? I have no emotions such as hate and anger. all I'm saying on my Facebook page or on other social media, all I am saying is my view as a representative of Ukrainian community, and we are trying to prove, people around us that the narrative about brotherly nations is not true. It's totally not true. This is the Kremlin propaganda, and this is the empirical Russia propaganda, which lives in a lot of people's heads. And when we had a conversation with him, and it wasn't emotional conversation, it was all tolerant conversation, diplomatic. His phrase was, "No, Marina, Russia and always they have common histories. They was always together," and it made me very puzzled. He left me puzzled. I realized that I need to talk to him when we will have a chance in a calm environment without emotions, and to show him with some Wikipedia pages, with some historical documents that this is not true. So my what I wanted to point out in my topic here, that Ukrainian community is actively discussing how on people-to-people level, how on a university level and on college level, it's very important to re-educate people and to show Ukrainian point of view on Ukrainian history. Thank you. Thank you very much. Victor?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much, Marina. Any questions at this moment, please, to Marina Lvovska?
I actually have a sort of a question or a comment. We have, when you mentioned that a community college is offering a course in Ukrainian identity, that is amazing. That is really amazing. Where I wondered where you were going to go with that is we have an influx of people who are trying to now raise their children in Ukrainian as a first language as opposed to Russian. Do you know of any efforts in your area to teach Ukrainian as a heritage language? And the reason I ask is that in Philadelphia, we're seeing also a large influx of refugees, and the local Ukrainian Saturday schools are now in a position where they can offer heritage language learning. So it's to people who are Ukrainian but don't speak Ukrainian, and they already do this for children of immigrants or my children's generation. But I'm wondering if there's any efforts like that to help Ukrainians who now want to learn Ukrainian in the Washington area.
Correct me if I'm understanding it right. So by heritage language, you mean that people who are actually Ukrainians but haven't spoken Ukrainian. So like Ukrainian as a second language or heritage language, let's say. Okay.
Exactly.
I hear some talks about it. I've seen several posts about offering Ukrainian in Arlington School. This is the lady I know personally. I haven't seen a huge movement towards this direction. There are talks. We feel the need. We only have one Ukrainian Saturday school in the area, which is actually has a pretty long history of 60 years, but it's only one. And we would, it's a wishful thinking. I only wish for this seeds to be planted in different schools in the area, not only Washington, D.C., but Maryland and Virginia and other spots. We'll see. I will update you on that later on. I have heard about starting Ukrainian classes, but I haven't seen it massively started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina. Please stay with us. I would like to give microphone now to Dr. McCollister, locally known well. He is on our program for the third time. He is, among all other things, expert on Russian-American relations, and also participant of a newly formed tri-state sunflower seeds group to collect help for Ukrainian refugees in Europe. Dr. McCollister, please, microphone is yours for whatever you want to say us on this date. But I definitely would like to ask you to talk about current events, most current events, following what Anara told us. Thank you.
Yeah, it has been an interesting week. On the battlefield, There have been a number of very interesting developments. It really does look like the Russian offensive in the east is really starting to culminate, that it's kind of reached its maximum. The Wagner force groups have taken horrendous casualties. Russian regular units in Bakhmut have taken heavy casualties. I think that Russian offensive has neared its end. And there are more and more hints that the Ukrainians are preparing to go on the offensive. And it does look like it's going to be in May or June from the people that I follow, that I listen to, people like General Mark Hertling, General Ben Hodges, and others, that it looks like we're looking at a May, June timeframe. You've started to see the Ukrainians do exactly what they did before their offensive in the Donbass in September and in Kherson in November, which is start to whittle away at Russian logistics. I just noticed just in the last few minutes, there were explosions in Sevastopol in the last hour. There was an attack on a Russian train carrying cruise missiles in Crimea at one of their great logistics hubs, their greatest logistics hubs in northern Crimea. We're starting to see attacks all across, more in the Melitopol area. So I think what you're starting to see is exactly the same kind of attacks. Either we're using precision missiles, using HIMARS, those kind of things. And I think we're actually starting to see some guerrilla activities. I think you're starting to see partisan activities in those areas that are carrying out some of those strikes. That's absolutely what you would expect to happen before a big offensive. An awful lot of the interesting thing has been on the diplomatic front. Just last week when we talked, we had the ICC indict Vladimir Putin. I think that's had an effect. I think it probably affected the summit with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I actually wrote my dissertation on US-Soviet summit meetings in the Cold War, so it's something I actually have some experience with. It was striking, and I know Victor's going to talk about this, and Anara talked about it earlier. I don't want to go too far, but it was striking how little Putin got. When these summits come along, 95% of what happens at a summit is pre-cooked. It's actually teams of negotiators as the summit approaches, pre-negotiating things so that you can present these successes, so that the leader looks good, that the summit's a success. Almost all of it is pre-negotiated. There are some examples, the Moscow summit in 1972 and some others, where you had some really hardcore negotiations at the summit itself. But in fact, Putin came away from the summit with very, very little, more than a photo op. He got a photo op and that was about it. I was struck by something Anara said earlier, that Russia is essentially becoming an energy colony of China. That there were, and I haven't seen, I'm going to be careful here because I haven't seen the specifics of what I was agreed to, but there were several agreements that looked like negotiations, talks about Chinese development in the Russian Far East, in the Russian Arctic, which I am very interested in, as the polar ice cap, as the Arctic ice cap is melting. We're opening up this open ocean at the top of the Earth, and it's becoming an incredibly important trade route and an arena for international competition, and China wants part of that. China wants to be, they call themselves a near Arctic power. I think they've gotten some agreements there for, and I don't know what the specifics are. I'm going to follow this very carefully, on Chinese use of the Russian territory in the Arctic. So that's really interesting and something that past Russian leaders would never have agreed to. This in many ways has been a nightmare for Russian leaders, that China would exploit the Far East, would exploit Siberia. And then the last thing I think has been really important in the last week, and something that this podcast can do and those that Sunflower Seeds can do. And I think this is the critical thing. And we've started to see Ukraine become more and more of a controversial issue in American politics. And as we approach 2024, it's important that we get this right. The key, what Clausewitz called the center of gravity for the Ukrainian government, for the Allied war effort, is public opinion, is American public opinion and European public opinion. All of us here that are in the United States, at least, all of us have senators and congressmen. We need to contact them. We need to talk to them. We need to encourage support. We need to, if West Virginia has a Democratic senator and a Republican senator, you should be calling both. You should be calling both Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito. You should be calling your congressman. I'm going to call Brad Wenstrup, my congressman here in Southern Ohio. I'm going to call Sherrod Brown. J.D. Vance, I think, is a lost cause. He's come out against the U.S. support for Ukraine, but we have to make this bipartisan. This cannot be a partisan effort. This has to be both parties understanding that American strategic interests, that our values are at stake, that this is a genocidal war. We have to reach out to those folks because that is the key. Putin's strategy is simple. He thinks he can outlast us. He thinks that his control of Russia is unassailable, that he can have a long war, and that he will wear the will of the democracies down. And ultimately, that's how he's going to win. That is now his strategy. It's a long war, kind of frozen conflict strategy where the West finally turns its back on Ukraine. And then after he's had time to refit and rebuild, he can then go ahead and resume the offensive. And one other thing, and this goes directly to the heart of what we at Sunflower Seeds are doing, Putin weaponizes refugees. He weaponized refugees in Syria very effectively. He drove millions of Syrians into Europe. Millions of Syrians into Europe, where he fostered anti-immigrant populism, where he fostered the development of neo-fascist or even fascist parties all across Europe. And he supported all those, directly supported Marine Le Pen and the National Rally in France and the Alternative for Germany party. This is what he does. He weaponizes refugees. And if he can continue to flood Europe with refugees, he can gradually start to erode European support for the war effort too. So I think what we're doing is really important. We have to build American support across the board, Republicans, Democrats, everybody, to see that this is in the vital interests of the United States, the Western Alliance generally, and democracies around the world. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCollister, for this absolutely brilliant summary of what's going on right now. Very succinct and very powerful. Thank you. Dr. Leonard Deutsch, I see your face. Leonard, please, we want your comment. Dr. Deutsch is former graduate dean of Marshall University, and I remember when 28 years ago he interviewed me when I discovered this part of the planet.
I wanted to hear the pluses and minuses of an attack inside Russia itself by drone or missile. Do you think that's a bad idea, a good idea, against military installations, against infrastructure? What are the pluses and minuses on that?
I think this question to Bob.
Okay, you got me? I turned my mic off there for a second.
We see you.
Okay. I think it entirely depends on the frequency. So far, what the Ukrainians have done, I think, are absolutely support. I think Ukrainian attacks on infrastructure especially kind of in the near Ukraine space. Attacking Russian logistics networks. They've had attacks on bases. I actually support that. I don't think that's a problem. If the United States were to start to give the Ukrainians, say, ATACMS missiles, which I absolutely support, and then the Ukrainians began to launch large-scale, consistent strikes into Russia, I think that might be more of a problem, and I think that's what the administration is worried about, that might move us up the escalation ladder. So I think before we give them deeper strike weapons like F-16s, ATACMS missiles, Gray Eagle drones, that we will negotiate some kind of agreement that those weapons will not be used to strike particularly deep into Russia. So I think that's absolutely what the hesitance has been. And I think over time, I actually do think that the Ukrainians are going to get, and for me, the number one thing they've got to get are the ATACMS missiles. I think we need to give those there. I would like to see us do the Gray Eagle drones. On the F-16s, I think the F-16s would help the Ukrainians with deep strike missions, particularly attacking, say, the Kerch Strait Bridge, those kind of things. Logistics hubs in Crimea would be accessible, especially if we can give them satellite-guided munitions. They could help in the Ukrainian offensive using smart weapons, smart anti-tank weapons. But I do think that there's a lot of trepidation about that if it were to go beyond a certain scope and range.
Thank you for an
thank you,
enlightening
Bob.
response.
Thank you, Leonard. I can add that I have heard a few analysts who are thinking about future, and many would agree that to prevent further attacks, revenge from Russia, Ukraine would need some kind of demilitarized zone along its borders, so that Russian troops will not be able to store munitions and have military use railways there. This is one of the actually logical suggestions here. Otherwise, we would really run into Vietnam or Korea situation, and without American on-ground support, obviously, which is not foreseen. So it is encouraging to see that Ukraine has those resources right now, and of course it would not survive without American military support. Everyone understands it now, and hopefully they negotiate needed rate and amount of this support. One interesting news today, should I add, was a mixed report on Novaya Kakhovka, which is important town in Kherson region, and there are mixed news. Russians deny that they withdrew, but there are some indications that Russian troops are leaving this strategic point on the left bank of Dnipro, so within the occupied zone.
I have a quick comment to jump in, but before I do, I want to point out to our viewers that Dean Deutsch is a very generous benefactor to several refugees in this country from Ukraine, and it's just a lovely personal thing he does under the radar, no spotlight. Thank you so much. We all know him to be an incredibly generous, wise, and kind person, but thank you for supporting refugees here in the United States. I have a reaction to or not a reaction, something dawned on me, Dr. McCollister, as you were speaking. Ukrainians such as my generation and the generation above us always tended to be more conservative because it was the Republicans who were like evil empire and seemed to understand or be more empathetic to the plight of people who were resettled here from Ukraine. And this last year has been really difficult because you have people who have been, just because of their circumstances, naturally tended towards conservatives, now all of a sudden feel abandoned by that party. And it's just I've heard a lot of things in the primary elections, in the midterm elections in November. There were a lot of folks who, for the first time in their lives, were like questioning, and in fact, changed how they vote because of this war. So I appreciate your urging us to for this to be a bipartisan effort and for us to reach out to our representatives of both parties. It was just something that dawned on me as you were speaking.
Yeah, there's a battle underway in the Republican Party. The Republican Party since prior to World War II, Max Boot has a really good column on this in the Washington Post this week. Prior to World War II, America was a profoundly isolationist country, but the core of the isolationist sentiment in American politics was in the Republican Party. The America First movement, not talking about Donald Trump. Now we're talking about the American First movement and Charles Lindbergh, and the American First movement was even involved with German propaganda. They had very close links. There were 24 American congressmen and senators who were working with a German propagandist here in the United States, a guy named George Sylvester Viereck. There was a huge scandal about that. And it ended up in a great sedition trial in 1944, which is absolutely forgotten in American history. Rachel Maddow's got a great podcast about it. It's called Ultra. You might want to listen to it. It's incredibly interesting. It's amazing how much I learned. But following World War II, the Republican Party became very internationalist. And in fact, both parties were. We used to say that politics ended at the water's edge, and that we were basically both parties. The policy of containment was invented by the Truman administration, but continued by the Eisenhower administration. And so you had pretty bipartisan support for that policy. But we're now starting to see that fray, and there is this really intense debate within the Republican Party. Now, there's some on the Democratic Party too, and the isolationist part of the Democratic Party has always been the far left. In some ways, this is the extremes against the middle. But it's particularly powerful in the Republican Party right now, this isolationist sentiment. And we need for the center-right Republicans who believe that America has an important role to play in the world to step up, and we need to encourage those. I think Sally Moore Capito was one of those people. I think she will support this effort. From Kentucky, not very far away, Mitch McConnell has been very outspoken. So, and he has been outspoken in support of Ukraine. We need to encourage those folks, and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, they need to hear from us, and they need to know that this is important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that Dr. Fett wrote to Joe Manchin and got a response, which was nice. A Democratic.
Actually, I got a response from Sally Moore Capito as well. I'm sending almost daily updates to them within the frame of Empathy for Ukraine volunteering program. And I have a note right here in chat from Leslie Titus. 1 second. Leslie writes, I think it's ultimately about post-World War II liberal international order versus isolationism, populism. Yes, and I would also add that a lot of people on the left, the extreme left, Johnny comes lately, will probably find themselves in a very strange environment right now, because they still keep those sentiments, what with Soviet Union and Cuba and Venezuela politics, and now these dominoes fall in a very different situation. But this is my comment as an amateur commentator, or as we all are now. We took up, as Dr. Schray and Anara said, we took up this program, this podcast a year ago. This is our 56th week. We are not going to stop. We will interview and recruit people from all over the world to talk about Ukrainian war and obviously you cannot avoid talking about Russia. At this moment, we would like to take more questions. I know my friends are joining now from Ukraine. I see Sergei Kamyshan, and I still see Yuri Marusik, who is joining from Turku, Finland, I believe. So if you guys want to open your microphone and ask something, you're welcome to. We have other people. We have quite a bit of participants today for this round table. Thank you all for coming. Any questions or comments, please? If I can translate if you want to speak some other language. If you want to ask a question, make yourself unmuted. Yuri Schechter.
Yeah.
Welcome. Yuri joins from New Jersey. Yes? Yuri, you care to comment?
Victor, are you asking me?
Yes, you unmuted yourself, so.
No, I think I pressed the hand by mistake. No, I didn't really have any question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you then for joining us so often. And any other questions, please, or comments? No? Okay, maybe the panel has something to say. I would thank, meanwhile, definitely Dr. McCollister and Marina Lvovska. August, I see your face.
Yes, I have a question if I could.
Sure.
I know nothing about Russian history, so I've been reading this little Russian encyclopedia, one volume published in 1961. And last evening, I read the account of Boris Nikolaevich Chicherin, who was a politician, a theoretician, and he drew a clear distinction between society consisting of manifold associations of persons bound by diverse interests and the state, which to him is a union of free people bound by law and governed by the supreme power in the interests of the common good. And my question is, what happened to the successors of Chicherin? Did Lenin and Stalin eliminate all of them? Are they completely gone? Is that idea completely gone from Russian modern political thinking?
Well, I don't know much about Russian modern political thinking or even existence of such. But what you are asking is the old, it translates in Russian history, as far as I know, into old argument between so-called Slavophiles and Westerners, Zapadniki. Right. And the idea of state, which means society, the idea of society, rather, which lives by law, in Russian history, mentality, practice, is opposite to the idea of state, which lives by will of the ruler or rulers. Many go as far as to connect it to Mongolian power, to the power of Khans, starting from Genghis Khan and his successors of 13th to approximately 15th centuries, so-called Mongolian yoke, which essentially gave later Tsars a model of their state, autocratic rule, with some council or ministers probably, but definitely prevalence of not just state, but individual power. And it seems that those archaic ideas and practices never left Russia. Most people in the West do not know that serfdom, enslavement, which was abolished only in 19th century, was actually introduced after Mongolian rule, quite late. It was enslavement of lower classes by the upper classes, something extremely archaic also. And moreover, these slaves were private property at this time. Private property still existed when Lenin and Stalin and their minions introduced so-called Soviet regime. In practice, the slavery was institutionalized as the state enterprise, collective farms. Farmers, most people don't know that farmers in Soviet Union did not have identification papers until my generation. They first got their IDs only in 1974, which meant they could not move much around or leave their place of work. So all this, I could talk probably about this forever again as an amateur, but the idea of freedom, individual freedom, was, I would say, very foreign to Russian Empire, and definitely in its reincarnation as the Soviet Union. Most historians, including those in Russia, would agree that European-style democracy-style freedom existed in Russia for several months in 1917, since March to October, between two so-called revolutions of February and October, and then maybe for a couple of years in the late 80s, early 90s of 20th century, which definitely was not enough to form a free society. And what we can see now is not so much return to archaic times, but a resurgence of those ideas and emotions which never, unfortunately, have left. We don't know what future brings, but one thing is obvious: the modern conflict, modern war in Ukraine and conflicts in other places all signify for the further disintegration of this imperial history, imperial narrative. I hope that we will live to see
Right.
some of
Very
the positive results of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if we don't have any more questions or comments from viewers or panel, we might conclude today's roundtable. Thank you all. Do we have any more comments from anyone? No. Thank you. Дякуємо to everyone who joined and everyone who listens weekly. And your support, your feedback is extremely important to us. We feel it every week, every day when we correspond with our friends. We came to know so many great people over this year, and together, I hope we will contribute to victory. Kateryna?
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас в наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці, і до наступного тижня прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Thank you, everybody.